Hello everybody, in this video we are going to talk about CSF, or we can call it Cerebro Spinal Fluid. What is CSF? Let's talk about it. CSF is a watery and colorless fluid that flows in and around your brain and spinal cord. CSF is flowing around our brains and spinal cord. Commonly, CSF is produced by choroid plexus epithelial cells. Epithelial cells of choroid plexus and ependymal cells, which are present in our brain. The rate of formation normally 20 milliliter is formed per hour. If we multiply it within 24 hours, it might be around 500 milliliter per day, or in 24 hours. The rate of formation is increased during meningitis. This rate of formation from 20 milliliter, it might be elevated to 30 milliliter per hour when there is meningitis, while human adult is about 150 milliliter. It applies pressure about 110 to 130 millimeter of water. It applies 110 to 130 millimeter of water. This is its normal pressure, and this pressure is increased when we are standing. When we are in standing position, this pressure might increase from 110 to 130. This might be about 140. When we are coughing, sneezing, so this pressure is also increased. When we are crying, so in these situations this pressure is increased. Composition. What is CSF composed of? Amino acid, glucose, sodium, potassium, magnesium, calcium, and so on. Now let's talk about a function of CSF. Before function, we are going to talk about circulation of CSF. How is it circulated in our brain and spinal cord? Where as it produced, or we can call CSF is produced in these ventricles, like we have written here. These are different ventricles where CSF is produced. The first ventricle, this ventricle is called lateral ventricle, and this ventricle is called third ventricle, and this is the final ventricle, which is called fourth ventricle. This is fourth ventricle. Okay, now let's talk about the first one, lateral ventricle. We have two lateral ventricles. Okay, so let's talk about some parts of lateral ventricle. This is the frontal horn. This is the occipital horn of lateral ventricle. It's called atrium of lateral ventricle. We can trigone also this part, and this is the body. This is the temporal horn of lateral ventricle. These are the parts of lateral ventricle. Okay. From all these parts, CSF is flowing down to third ventricle, why the foramen called foramen of Monro. Foramen of Monro. From foramen of Monro, it is flowing down to third ventricle. From the third ventricle, it is flowing down to fourth ventricle by cerebral aqueduct. Now the CSF is in fourth ventricle. Suppose in fourth ventricle we have other foramens. These two foramens are called foramen Lashka. Yeah, foramen Lashka. They secrete this water to the subarachnoid space. This foramen is called foramen of or foramen legendi. Foramen Lashka and foramen legendi both excrete the CSF to subarachnoid space, and the final foramen is central foramen, which secretes to central canal of spinal cord. Here we have some choroid plexus. In these areas we have choroid plexus which secrete CSF. This is the sign of choroid plexus. Okay. Now let's talk about the function of CSF. The CSF is shock absorber. CSF serves as a medium for nutrition exchange. It's another function. It removes metabolites, or we can call waste metabolites from CNS. CSF transport medicines in some diseases. This is the anterior view of ventricles. This is the same like we have discussed. This is suppose anterior horn of lateral ventricle. This is the occipital horn of lateral ventricle. This is the temporal horn of lateral ventricle. This is the body of lateral ventricle. From all these, when CSF is secreted, then secreted CSF flows down to by a foramen called foramen of Monro to the third ventricle. This is the third ventricle. From the third ventricle, it is secreted to fourth ventricle by cerebral aqueduct. This is the fourth ventricle. We have here two lateral foramens, one posterior side, two lateral foramens called foramen of